My boss told me, to my face, "You don't deserve this company." The CEO was sitting 3 chairs away when he said it. 2 weeks later, that same CEO looked at him and replied, "Then neither do you." And security walked my boss out of the building while I was still holding my notebook. I'm not some startup genius. I'm not a whistleblower on TV, and I definitely didn't plan to get a man fired. I'm just the guy who spent 7 years quietly fixing other people's mistakes. While my boss took credit and bought himself a new car every bonus season, he thought I'd swallow it forever, smile in meetings, stay late, patch his messes before the CEO ever saw them. And for a long time, I did. I told myself that's just corporate life, that loyalty would pay off eventually. It finally did, just not in the way he expected. The night before everything blew up, he looked at me across his glass desk and said, "Guys like you don't deserve this company." He had no idea that sentence was the thing that would cost him his job, his reputation, and the only piece of power he'd ever had. I didn't start out hating him. When I joined the company, he actually seemed like one of those ambitious, slightly abrasive but harmless types. The kind who speaks loudly in hallways and always holds a coffee cup like it's a prop. He had this way of acting busy without ever doing the kind of work you could point to. And if I'm honest, I didn't notice it at first because I was drowning in my own onboarding tasks and trying not to embarrass myself. I learned fast, though, faster than he expected, maybe faster than he wanted. The moment the first crisis hit, a client escalation he had conveniently missed because he was at a golf tournament, he tossed it onto my desk with a shrug. "You're good with details. Clean this up, make me look good." That was the moment I should have understood the dynamic. Instead, I told myself it was a chance to prove I was reliable. I stayed late, fixed the issue, drafted the apology, saved the contract. He forwarded my email to the COO without my name on it and added a smiley face like he'd just saved Christmas. I told myself it didn't matter, that people noticed consistency, that being invisible now meant being indispensable later. What a stupid philosophy that turned out to be. My team noticed first, not the executives. The analysts, coordinators, the people who actually push work through the pipes. They'd come to my desk with questions meant for him, roll their eyes when I explained what he'd approved without reviewing, and whisper things like, "Does he even know what we do?" I always defended him, even when it felt like lying. "He's busy. He trusts us. It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Because busy turned out to mean lunch meetings with people who didn't work here and networking events that suspiciously lined up with every sports game on the calendar. Still, I adapted. I covered for him. I kept projects afloat. I documented everything. At first for my own sanity, then eventually because I noticed something. Every quarter our numbers looked perfect on paper, but felt wrong in reality. Clients were frustrated. Internal turnover doubled. People who'd been here longer than both of us were quietly updating their resumes. Meanwhile, his presentations to upper management were slicker than a politician's handshake. Clean charts, optimistic forecasts, buzzwords that meant nothing but sounded confident enough to pass. And the CEO? He was more mythology than man. I'd seen him twice. Once at a holiday meeting where he thanked us for another year of excellence, and once in an elevator where he nodded at me but was clearly editing an email in his head. So when an internal memo announced he'd be spending an entire day with our department because a major client had complained about disconnected leadership, something shifted in the building. Not fear, not excitement. More like a pressure drop before a storm. My boss reacted like it was a personal attack. He slammed his office door, spent an hour rewriting slides we'd never use, then marched out and announced that everyone needed to align messaging and support a unified narrative, which was his way of saying, if anything goes wrong, it's your fault. I should have been nervous. Instead, I felt something else. Clarity. For the first time in years, I saw the shape of the problem. Not a monster, just a man who was terrified someone above him would finally notice the truth. And the truth was simple. I'd been running his department for years while he collected the applause. The CEO visiting wasn't a threat to me. It was a threat to him. The night before the visit, he called me into his office. The glass walls reflected the entire floor, rows of empty desks and late-night hums from the AC. He didn't sit, he paced. He told me I needed to stay in my lane, to avoid unnecessary commentary, to support the vision he'd built. Then he added that line, the one he thought would put me in my place. Guys like you don't deserve this company. I didn't react, not because it didn't hurt, but because something clicked into place the moment he said it. He had no idea how much I knew, how much I'd documented, how many people were ready to speak up if someone else spoke first. He thought I was still the quiet guy who swallowed insults to keep the peace, but that version of me was gone. The next morning, the CEO walked into our department with a notebook, a calm expression, and the kind of silence that makes people sit up straighter. My boss greeted him with both hands, a rehearsed smile, and a voice suddenly smoother than usual. I stayed slightly behind the group, not hiding, just observing. Everything felt balanced on the edge of something unseen. And then, right before the meeting started, the CEO looked directly at me, not past me, not through me, at me. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't recognition. It was the look of someone who already sensed that the story he'd been told didn't match the room he walked into. That's when everything truly began. The CEO didn't start with small talk. He didn't even sit. He glanced around the conference room like someone comparing a photograph to the real thing, checking what had been edited out. My boss stood beside the screen, hand on the clicker, ready to perform. You could practically hear the smile in his voice. Shall we begin with the quarterly overview? The CEO nodded, but he didn't look at him. He looked at the rest of us, the team, like he was searching for something he hadn't yet defined. My boss launched into the presentation with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed every line and never imagined anyone might contradict him. Smooth charts, clean metrics, words like growth trajectory and operational alignment, all polished to a shine. He gestured to the screen as though he'd built every slide himself, though I'd been the one pulling data until midnight the week before. Then came the first question. These churn numbers, the CEO said quietly, why do they look stable when client retention is down 8% year over year? My boss blinked. It was just a fraction of a second, but long enough for anyone paying attention to notice. Well, he said, clearing his throat, our reporting system. Your reporting system, the CEO repeated. You designed this model, right? My boss's smile tightened. Of course, with my team's support. That was the first time his hand drifted subtly toward me, not pointing, just gesturing in my direction as if proximity alone proved involvement. I didn't move. I kept my face neutral. The CEO followed the motion, his eyes landing on me again with that same quiet calculation. And these customer satisfaction surveys, the CEO continued, why is the written feedback significantly worse than the numerical scores? My boss opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He hadn't thought he would be asked to explain contradictions, only to present a polished outcome. He fumbled, stalling. We've encouraged brevity in survey responses to remove emotional bias. The CEO didn't react. He simply asked, who decided that? My boss lifted his chin. I did. I watched the CEO write something down. One word. I couldn't see it, but I knew it wasn't a compliment. My boss hurried forward, clicking to the next slide as though momentum might save him. When he needed praise, he used we. When he needed distance, he used they. He painted himself as the architect of every win and the victim of every shortcoming. He called the team young but promising, and implied several times, without naming me, that some people struggle with the strategic layer and aren't fully aligned with leadership expectations. A few of my coworkers shifted in their seats. They weren't shocked. They were tired. Tired of carrying his weight. Tired of hearing him inflate his role while dismissing ours. But none of them looked up. And honestly, I didn't blame them. Speaking up in front of a CEO is not bravery, it's a calculated risk. People with mortgages don't gamble easily. Eventually, the CEO closed his notebook. "I'd like to speak with the project leads directly," he said. That meant me. My boss's smile twitched, as if someone had pulled a thread too tight. "Well," he said quickly, "I can answer on their behalf. I oversee—" "On this," the CEO interrupted, "I want to hear from the people actually doing the work." It was the first crack. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. My boss stepped aside reluctantly, like someone giving up the steering wheel, but keeping one hand nearby just in case. The CEO turned to me. "Tell me about the Westbridge account. Not the numbers, not the slide. The account." I kept my tone level. They escalated because implementation deadlines slipped 3 times. The delays were caused by resource misallocations after priorities were shifted mid-cycle. "Shifted by whom?" he asked. I answered what was true. "By our director, my boss." I didn't embellish, I didn't dramatize, I didn't use adjectives, just facts, delivered in the same tone I would use to read a shipping label. The CEO listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked for specifics. I provided dates, emails, meetings, all documented, all verifiable, all decisions made by him, not me. My boss tried to interject twice, but the CEO raised a hand each time. Another project. Another inconsistency between the slide deck and reality. Another explanation I gave calmly, clearly, without a single accusation. Every time I spoke, it was a thread, and the CEO was pulling each one until the entire fabric of the presentation moved. By the time we reached the last account, my boss's voice had gone flat. The room wasn't hostile, just heavy, like everyone sensed a tide turning, but no one wanted to breathe too loudly. Finally, the CEO set his pen down. "Thank you," he said to me. Not polite, not automatic, genuine. Then he turned to my boss. "Let's talk about team culture." My boss brightened, for the first time since the meeting began, because culture was his favorite word. He had a whole speech memorized, one he'd repeated at offsites and onboarding sessions. Words like ownership, accountability, growth mindset, trust. He started reciting it, voice swelling with confidence, until the CEO asked, "Do you believe your team trusts you?" My boss froze. It was half a second, but enough. "Of course they do," he said, too fast. "And do you trust them?" the CEO asked. "Most of them." That was slower and darker. My stomach tightened. "Explain," the CEO said. My boss exhaled sharply, the mask slipping just enough. "Some people aren't aligned. Some people create unnecessary friction. Some people want the rewards without the responsibility." His eyes flicked to me. The room felt smaller. The CEO didn't look away from him. "Names." My boss hesitated, a long, heavy pause, then said, "Him." He pointed directly at me. "He doesn't deserve this company." There it was, the line he'd used in private, now spoken in front of the man who could end careers with a sentence. For a moment, no one moved. Then the CEO leaned back slightly, hands folded, studying him like someone examining a crack in a foundation he'd walked over for years, without noticing. "What makes you think," the CEO said slowly, "that you decide who deserves this company?" My boss straightened, sensing danger but not understanding its size. "I led this department. I set expectations. I maintain standards." The CEO didn't blink. "And what standards are those?" Silence. The thick, suffocating kind that exposes everything people try to hide. The CEO closed his notebook. "We're done here," he said, not to me, to him. Something in his voice shifted, subtle but final. My boss didn't hear it. I did, because that was the moment everything started to fall. The CEO didn't raise his voice when he said it. That made it worse. "We're done here." He closed his notebook, stood up, and thanked everyone for their time. People took the cue instantly. Chairs scraped, laptops snapped shut, and the room emptied in that awkward shuffle where nobody wants to be the first or the last to walk out. Could you stay? He added, looking at my boss, then at me. You too. My coworkers avoided my eyes as they left. Not because they blamed me, because they knew something serious was about to happen and didn't want to be associated with it. Self-preservation is a quiet instinct. The door clicked shut. The room suddenly felt twice as big and half as bright. The CEO didn't sit back down. He stood at the end of the table, hands resting lightly on the back of a chair, like a judge who hadn't decided the sentence yet. Help me understand, he said to my boss. Why does your version of this department not match what I just heard? My boss laughed. It came out wrong. Too sharp. Too high. With all due respect, he started, which always meant none was coming. You've just heard one perspective. My team is young. They get overwhelmed. They don't always see the bigger picture. I do. The CEO's eyes didn't move. Is that what you meant when you said he doesn't deserve this company? My boss swallowed. I meant he doesn't understand what it takes at this level. He's operational, tactical, not strategic. People like that can be dangerous if they undermine leadership in front of senior management. There it was, the accusation he'd been building toward it since the meeting started. The CEO turned to me. Have you been undermining him? I held his gaze. No, I've been fixing problems before our clients leave. My boss scoffed. There, you see? That attitude. He thinks he's the hero. He thinks... I think, I cut in quietly, that we're losing good people and almost lost Westbridge because decisions were made without understanding the workload on the ground. I think I've raised those concerns through the channels we're supposed to use, and I think nothing changed. The CEO watched me for a long moment. What channels? Weekly one-on-ones, status reports, the engagement survey. I hesitated, then added, HR. My boss spun toward me. What HR? I didn't flinch. I logged concerns with our business partner 3 months ago about burnout and communication issues. They suggested I document patterns and keep them updated, so I did. For the first time, the CEO showed something like surprise. Not at me, at the word document. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message. We're going to pause this, he said. I want HR and legal looped in before we go any further. My boss spread his hands, incredulous. Legal? For what? For a performance discrepancy? This is ridiculous. He's overreacting. He takes things personally. I've been coaching him for months. The CEO didn't look up from his phone. I've been reading your coaching notes. My boss blinked. My notes? You send them to my direct reports every quarter, the CEO said, finally meeting his eyes. Your narrative about your team is very consistent. Almost too consistent. Underperforming, but promising. Lacks maturity. Not ready yet. Funny thing about that language. It keeps people in place without ever promoting them or firing them. They stay stuck. You stay in control. My boss went quiet. I'm going to ask both of you, the CEO said calmly, to keep working as normal today. You, he nodded at me, send me everything you've documented that you feel I should see. Directly. No filtering. You, he turned to my boss, do the same. Every performance concern, every coaching plan, every issue you've logged. We'll review it all together with HR. My boss tried to protest. This isn't necessary. I've delivered numbers for you quarter after quarter. I've cleaned up messes from other departments that you don't even know about. The CEO's face didn't change. If that's true, the documentation will support you. He left before my boss could reply. The door closed. The silence that followed wasn't just tense. It was electric. My boss rounded on me as soon as we were alone. What did you tell HR? He hissed. The truth, I said. He laughed again, but there was nothing funny left in it. You think he's going to take your side? You think a CEO cares about some mid-level manager whining about feelings? I've been here 10 years. I've survived 3 reorganizations. You're a line item. I'm a line on the org chart. I picked up my notebook. Then you shouldn't be worried. His jaw clenched. For a second I thought he might actually grab my arm. Instead, he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You ever wonder," he said, "why people like you never make it up there?" "No," I replied. "I've been busy doing your job." His eyes flashed. For a moment I saw something I hadn't let myself name before. Not confidence. Dependence. He needed me to stay small, because that's what his entire act stood on. "I'll tell you what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to send him your little folder. He'll skim it, if that. HR will nod, say they take it seriously, and then ask me how to handle the disruption. And when this blows over, you and I are going to have a very different conversation about your future here." He stepped back, straightened his tie, and walked out like he still owned the hallway. I could have backed down. I could have watered it all down when I sent the CEO my files, left out the worst parts, framed it as miscommunication instead of manipulation. People do that all the time. It's safer to live with a bad boss than risk being labeled difficult. Instead, I went to my desk, plugged in my laptop, and opened the folder I'd been quietly building for months. Emails where he overrode capacity planning and then blamed delays on execution issues. Screenshots of late-night messages where he demanded last-minute changes and then scolded people for not meeting made-up deadlines. Exit interviews from good people who left for personal reasons but had told me privately they couldn't stand the constant gaslighting. The engagement survey comments, the HR ticket numbers, dates, times, decisions. I didn't include interpretations, no adjectives, no armchair psychology, just events in order, with enough context that a stranger could understand what had happened without me in the room. It took me an hour to compress everything into a single file. When I finally attached it to an email addressed directly to the CEO, my fingers hovered over the keyboard for a full 30 seconds. All I wrote in the body was, "Per your request. Happy to provide any additional detail or speak to specific incidents." I hit send. That was the first decision that felt like mine in a long time. The next 2 weeks were strange. On the surface, nothing changed. We still had stand-ups, still joined status calls, still smiled on camera for other departments. My boss pretended everything was normal, sometimes more aggressively than before. He started CCing the CEO on positive updates, praising the team with an edge that made it sound like a threat. "We're really pulling together," he'd write. "Despite some internal resistance, we're aligned and committed." But under the surface, the current had shifted. HR booked one-on-ones with my coworkers. They never said why, just a routine check-in. People came back from those meetings quieter, more thoughtful. A couple of them stopped by my desk afterward, closed the door to the small focus room, and said variations of the same thing. "I backed you up. I told them what's really been happening. I should have said something sooner." Meanwhile, my boss got jumpy. He started closing his office door more often, making calls on speaker with the volume low, leaving the building for lunch meetings, and coming back more agitated each day. He stopped talking about when, not if, he made VP. He stopped talking about his career at all. On a Thursday afternoon, an invite hit my calendar. Meeting, Department Leadership Review. Attendees, CEO, HR Director, Legal Counsel, boss's name, my name, location, boardroom 3. No description, no agenda, no time to prepare anything new. I walked in exactly on time. My boss was already there, back straight, jaw set. The HR director sat beside the CEO, a neat stack of papers in front of her. Legal dialed in on a screen at the end of the room. The CEO got right to it. "We've spent the last 2 weeks reviewing documentation and speaking with your team," he said to my boss. "We've cross-checked your reports against project records, client feedback, HR tickets, and our own engagement data." He tapped the stack of papers lightly. "What we see is a pattern," he continued. "Consistent, long-term, and not aligned with how we expect leaders to behave in this company." My boss bristled. "With all due respect, you've heard from people who are emotional, bitter, resistant to change. Of course they're going to complain about the person holding them accountable. The HR director didn't raise her voice. Several of those resistant employees have performance ratings higher than yours. He ignored her. I have delivered every quarter. I've hit every target you asked for. If a few fragile employees can't handle pressure, that's not a culture issue. That's a hiring issue. The CEO's expression didn't move. You've hit short-term targets, he corrected, at the cost of long-term stability. We've lost key people out of your department. We've nearly lost key clients. And your own documentation frames almost everyone under you as both critical and not ready. That's not development. That's control. My boss leaned forward, voice rising. I've protected this company from mediocrity. People like him, he jabbed a finger in my direction, don't understand what it takes to build something real. They want comfort. They want validation. They don't deserve this company. The room went very, very still. The CEO looked at him for a long time. Then he asked one simple question. And you do? My boss didn't hesitate. Absolutely. I built this department. Without me, this place would fall apart inside a quarter. The CEO exhaled slowly, as if finally reaching the end of a thought he'd been following since the day he walked into our floor. If you truly believe, he said quietly, that the people holding your results together don't deserve this company, then neither do you. There was no drama in his voice, no cinematic pause, just a decision, spoken out loud. I'm placing you on immediate administrative leave, the CEO continued. Effective now. HR will walk you through the process. Your system access will be revoked by end of day. We'll complete the formal termination process once all remaining documentation is reviewed. My boss stared at him like he hadn't heard correctly. Then he laughed, a short, incredulous sound. You can't be serious, he said. Over what? Hurt feelings? A few whiners? You're going to throw away 10 years of performance because some mid-level manager got his ego bruised? The CEO didn't answer. He nodded to HR. Please escort him to his office to collect personal items only. Security will meet you there. I watched my boss search the room for someone to back him up. HR looked down at her papers. Legal stayed silent on the screen. The only eyes he wouldn't meet were mine. He stood slowly, like a man waking from anesthesia. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, but not softer. This is a mistake, he said. You'll regret this. When the next numbers dip, you'll remember who was willing to do what you wouldn't. The CEO held his gaze. Maybe, he said, but at least I'll know I'm not building this company on people you don't even think deserve to be here. My boss turned toward the door. As he walked out, security fell in step behind him. I was still holding my notebook. When the door closed behind him, the room didn't relax. It exhaled. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a soft release of pressure. The kind you only feel after holding a weight longer than you realized. The CEO sat back down. The HR director gathered her papers into a neat stack, and Legal's voice came crackling through the speaker. We'll finalize the documentation on our end, the attorney said. Given the pattern we've identified, termination for cause is appropriate. No severance. The HR director nodded. We'll escort him to collect his things, verify what's personal, and deactivate his access by end of day. Then the CEO looked at me, not with gratitude, not with suspicion, with the kind of direct level attention that tells you the conversation isn't over. It's only shifting. Stay a moment, he said. HR and legal left. The door closed again, and suddenly it was just the two of us in the boardroom. The same room where he'd watched months of polished lies unravel in less than an hour. He didn't sit behind the table. He sat beside it, so we were at the same level. I want to understand something, he said quietly. How long has this actually been going on? I told him the truth. Not the dramatized version, not the corporate safe version. 2 years of work being redirected without context. 6 months of resource misallocations that created avoidable crises. 4 people who left because they were burned out and didn't feel heard. All of it consistent. All of it predictable. He listened without interrupting. He didn't write anything down. But I could see it. The way his jaw tightened when I named the employees who'd left. He remembered them. The way he leaned forward slightly at the mention of Westbridge. He'd felt that one personally. When I finished, he nodded slowly. Why didn't you escalate this earlier? It wasn't an accusation. It was a real question. I tried, I said, through the channels we're supposed to use. But I didn't want to trigger a war in the department. I figured fixing the problems quietly was better than provoking more chaos. He thought about that for a moment. That instinct, he said, is admirable and dangerous. I almost smiled. It was the closest thing to humor the day had seen. He continued, I need leaders who fix problems, but I also need leaders who won't let dysfunction hide behind them. You've been carrying more than your role requires, and the fact that you managed to keep this department running at all, that's not nothing. He stood, walked to the window, and stayed there a moment, hands in his pockets. When he turned back, the decision was already made. I'm restructuring the department, he said. Your former director's responsibilities will be split across 2 roles. One operational, one strategic. I want you in the operational role. Title bump, compensation adjustment, direct visibility to me and the COO. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I doubted the offer, but because for the first time in years I had a choice. Before you say anything, he added, this isn't a reward for taking down your boss. This is a correction. You've been doing the work without the title or authority. That ends today. I nodded. A simple gesture, but it felt like stepping through a doorway I'd been staring at for years. There's one condition, he said, sitting again. I need you to set boundaries. Real ones. You're not here to be the department's firefighter. You're here to lead, delegate, escalate, hold people accountable without carrying their work. If something is broken, I expect you to tell me before you bleed yourself dry fixing it. I took a breath. I can do that. Good, he said. Then softer. And don't make yourself indispensable again. It hides the cracks. It was the most accurate description of my past 2 years anyone had ever given. The next week unfolded like a quiet earthquake. No dramatic tremors, just steady shifts that changed the shape of everything. HR sent a formal removal announcement. Neutral tone, no details, standard corporate phrasing. My boss's name vanished from org charts, from group chats, from weekly reports as if he'd never existed. His office was emptied the same afternoon. Blinds closed until facilities could reassign the space. The department reacted in small, telling ways. People talked a little more openly. Projects stopped bottlenecking at the top. Meetings felt normal. Not walking on eggshells normal, just work. Real work. Several team members came to me privately, some with relief, some with guilt for not speaking sooner, some with cautious hope. I didn't blame any of them. Fear is a learned behavior, and he'd taught it well. But the biggest change wasn't them. It was me. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was bracing for someone else's decisions. I wasn't waiting for another midnight message. I wasn't rewriting someone else's bad call. I wasn't carrying a department on my back while pretending it was balanced. I had authority now, and weight. But the weight felt earned. On my first day in the new role, the CEO stopped by my desk. Not for a meeting, not for a crisis. Just to say, you'll do well. Don't disappear into the work. Lead it. Then he left as quietly as he had arrived. I moved into a new office. Not the corner one my former boss had occupied. I didn't want it. I chose a smaller room near the team with a clear glass wall and shelves I could fill with project binders instead of ego trophies. On my first day there, I closed the door not to isolate myself, but to take a moment alone, to look around and understand that every piece of this, every inch, had been built slowly, painfully, deliberately, not from revenge, not from ambition, from survival turning into clarity. A few days later, as I was leaving the building, I passed the security desk. One of the guards nodded at me and said, Rough couple of weeks, huh? I gave a small smile. Better now. He nodded again. Yeah, you can feel it. Place is quieter. And he was right. The company didn't magically transform overnight. There were still deadlines, still escalations, still mistakes to fix, but none of them were poisoned before they even reached my desk. We were rebuilding, but this time, the foundation wasn't rotting. On a rainy Tuesday, 2 weeks after the termination, the CEO called me into his office. No agenda, no slide deck, just coffee, 2 chairs, and a single printed page on his desk. Retention package, he said, sliding it toward me. We want you to stay, and we want you to feel supported staying. It wasn't a bribe. It wasn't a test. It was alignment. I signed it without hesitation. When I left his office and walked down the hallway, the same hallway where my boss once strutted like he owned the air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not pride. Peace. Real, grounded peace. The kind that comes not when someone else falls, but when you finally stop shrinking yourself to hold up someone who never deserved the pedestal they stood on. My boss had been wrong about one thing. I did deserve this company, just not the version he ran. And when the CEO walked him out, when he said, "Then neither do you," he wasn't choosing me over him. He was choosing the company over the facade. And for the first time in a long time, the company chose right.